I'll take this opportunity to also remind you to please turn off your mobile phones. It's really wonderful to see this turnout, and there were so many other people outside who couldn't get in. I think that's a testament to Dr. Norman Finkelstein's notoriety. I probably don't need to say much in the way of introduction, but in brief, Dr. Finkelstein is a historian, educator, and self-described forensic scholar who's been writing about the Israel-Palestine conflict for over 25 years. His books include The Holocaust Industry and The Image and Reality of the Israel-Palestine conflict. For those of you at the university, we have most of his works in our PSG library, and I can't recommend his writing enough. Amongst his many supporters are Noam Chomsky and Avi Shlaim. Dr. Finkelstein is one of the most prolific scholars on this subject, and in short, he's just about the best person we could possibly hope to have talking to us about this. It is a great, great pleasure to have him here in Leeds. Let's give a very warm welcome to Dr. Norman Finkelstein.
Let's just get the sound right. In the back row, if you hear me fine, raise your hand. Okay, so we're set on that. The room is a little warm, so we don't mind. Is there decent circulation, or is this the temperature you like it? No, because I know that I've been speaking for a long time, and a warm room tends to make people drowsy. So, is this the right circulation? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Well, I didn't have a chance to see Leeds because I just flew in as I came from London by train here. So I can't make any appreciative comments about your city and your university. Is it a good school?
Yes.
Yeah? Would you rank it in the second tier or third tier in the UK?
Fifth.
First? Okay, for those who are not delusional. Well, I'm sure it's a good school because a lot of people came out on Monday night to hear a boring lecture. That's a good sign of the seriousness of the student body. I'm going to be doing something this evening which I've not done in the past 27 years or so, which is in the past most of my efforts have been devoted to, have been invested in just comparing the conflict as it's depicted in most of the public media with the documentary record, what the record actually shows, in order to illustrate that there is a huge chasm, a huge divide, an appalling gap between how the conflict is depicted versus the reality of the conflict. But this evening, and probably for the next few months, if not longer, I'm going to be dealing with a different aspect of the topic, which is the practical one, namely, how do you solve it? What is the way to resolve the conflict? And the reason I've sort of switched gears is because I think there is now a real historical opportunity, an occasion which comes very rarely and can turn out to be fleeting, ephemeral, we don't know. But I think there is now the possibility to achieve a reasonably just and enduring resolution of the conflict. And the reason for that is that there have been very important new developments both in the region and internationally. And when I say internationally, I also include possibly auspicious developments in the United States as well. And given that there's, to use the fancy terms, a new configuration of power, a new constellation of power, it means that, for our purposes, it means that there may be a possibility of resolving the conflict. And now it's all the more important. It always has been, but now it's more important than ever that we have clarity about what the goal should be, and so we can apply our full energies, our full persuasive powers to try for once and for all to resolve the conflict, which I think everyone can agree, especially the older people in this room, has just gone on way too long. In fact, speaking as one of the older people in the room, it's positively preposterous how long this conflict has gone on. When you realize how uncontroversial it is and how relatively amenable the conflict is to a settlement, it just makes no sense. And I have no doubt that at some point in the future, maybe 100 years looking back, people are just going to wonder, how did it come to pass that when humanity was confronting so many problems of such colossal importance and potential for destruction, problems with the ecology, problems with the economy, that amidst all of this tiny pinprick on the world's map, the combined populations of the relevant countries, probably they can fit into one block of Beijing. And this thing hasn't been resolved. It's just completely absurd. And so I think now there is that possibility. And we have to sort of focus our mental energies and our moral energies in order to try to push it through. Because if you miss the opportunity, it may not come for a long time again. Well, what is that opportunity? The most obvious new developments are usually now subsumed under the rubric of the Arab Spring. The crucial potential transformations in the Arab-Muslim world. And as it happens, the two most important transformations have occurred in countries which historically have been critical for Israel. The first, which preceded the Arab Spring, but which is clearly capitalizing on the Arab Spring, is the emergence of Turkey under the leadership of Mr. Erdogan as a major regional power. And the Turkish government has adopted the Palestine cause as one of its major regional concerns and items on its agenda. Turkey, as everybody or some of you in the room would know, has been historically Israel's major ally in the Muslim world. So now you have Israel's major ally in the Muslim world taking, you can say, somewhere between a problematic and hostile stance towards Israel. It wavers and it may change. That's subject to a lot of variables. But for the moment, clearly there is a conflict that's emerged between Israel and Turkey. If Turkey has been Israel's major regional power, regional ally in the Muslim world, well, obviously Israel's major ally in the Arab world has been for the past 30 years, has been Egypt. And in Egypt too, as everybody in this room knows, there's been a popular revolt. Its outcome and consequences probably won't be known for a few years to come. But the bottom line is, because Turkey has undergone a relative democratic opening, any democratic opening in the Arab world is always a disaster for Israel, because Israel is hell-bent on making sure popular sentiment in the Arab world remains repressed, as does the United States and so the UK. And any popular expression of feeling in the Arab world is inevitably going to move in a direction hostile towards Israel. So to the extent that Egypt has had a relative democratic opening, it means problems for Israel. If you now move away from the region and you look at the global picture, Israel's stock in the last several years has fallen precipitously. Your own BBC World Service, I'm no great proponent of the BBC, I think it's wretched, but the BBC does a poll every year in which it asks a number of countries, 20 or 30 countries, the population, it's a cross-section, 20 or 30 countries, which countries do you think have exert the most positive influence in the world, and which countries do you think exert the most negative influence in the world? And always the most negative influence every year, for say the past 10 years, has been Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, and Israel. Those four are always in a category all their own, as exerting, I see the two Pakistanis, I can tell from your smile. Guys, I didn't say it was true, I just said for the moment, you're in the same boat as Israel. Consistently, Israel is sometimes ranked as exerting the worst influence in the world if it's engaged in one of its assaults in an Arab neighbor or Muslim neighbor. And when it's not, it's just in the generic category of the four worst. It's interesting to note that even in the countries which have a very powerful Israel lobby, where the Holocaust is maximally exploited, and where there are recurring shrieks about a new anti-Semitism, I would fit into those, I would put in that category Canada, Australia, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. In those 5 places, if you know the politics, the Israel lobby is very strong. The Nazi Holocaust is constantly exploited, and the claims of new anti-Semitism, especially, I should say, in the UK, barely another week passes without claims of Jewish students in college campuses coming under horrific anti-Semitic assault. Even there, public opinion, if you look at the polls, despite what the governments say, public opinion is overwhelmingly hostile to Israel. It's quite surprising, even if you look in places like Germany, the huge discrepancy, the huge gap that's opened up between official government policy and popular feeling regarding Israel. And as I said, it's equally true in the UK. Another recent example, as everybody here knows, the Palestinians put in a bid for statehood at the United Nations. The BBC World Service did another one of its polls, and every single country they polled, every one, in every single country, either a plurality or a majority, favored Palestinian statehood. There wasn't a single exception. Now, that also includes, remarkably enough, that includes the United States. Now, you have to bear in mind what that means, because in the U.S., the President of the United States opposed Palestinian statehood vehemently. Both major political parties opposed it violently. Both houses of Congress passed resolutions against it. the whole of the major media across the board opposed Palestinian statehood. But the poll showed that 45% of Americans supported it, and depending on the poll, there was others besides the BBC poll, and between 25 and 36% of Americans opposed it. So even in the US, amazingly enough, despite all the propaganda, all the misinformation and lies, even in the US, somehow the truth managed to get through. My suspicion is, in the case of the Americans, it's just an attitude of probably 95% of the Americans who were home never even heard of Palestine. The American attitude is sort of like, well, why the heck not? If everybody else has to say it. I don't know who they are, but why not? Actually, in its own ways, a pretty sensible position, I think. Why should everybody else be entitled to a state? But because Mr. Obama says no to Palestine, they should be disallowed that right. Beyond the broad American picture, there's the picture of American Jewry, American Jews. And there too, there have been very significant developments with I wouldn't call it a precipitous decline in support for Israel, but I would call it a protracted, steady decline in support for Israel. And the reason is not hard to find. American Jews are overwhelmingly, in their ideological inclination, they're overwhelmingly liberal. They have been since the Great Depression. American Jews have always voted for the Democratic Party in overwhelming numbers. American Jews have overwhelmingly, as compared to other ethnic groups, described themselves as liberal. The numbers are like for American Jews, it's about 40%, whereas for every other ethnic group, it's like 20 or 30%. American Jews are overwhelmingly liberal. And liberal in the American context basically means you believe in the rule of law, you believe in equality under the law, you believe in the peaceful resolution of crises as against going to war. That's what a liberal means in the United States. And American Jews have, over the recent years, they have found it more and more difficult to reconcile calling themselves liberal and supporting the policies of a government which are contrary to all of their liberal values. The bottom line is, I was determined to finish writing a book before I came here, and I just completed the manuscript of a book, and the title is Knowing Too Much. And the fact is, American Jews now know too much. There's too much now known about the conflict. Too many respectable liberal organizations, which incidentally are mostly staffed by Jews, organizations like Human Rights Watch. There's just too much they know, and they can no longer reconcile that knowledge with their claims to being liberal. And that's particularly noticeable among the younger generation, you would say under 40 generation, where support for Israel has fallen into deep decline. And the reason is obvious. I have to admit, coming here this evening, I'm slightly taken aback by the young people gathered outside this room, because my experience from fairly extensive lecturing is there are no more demonstrations supporting Israel when I come speak at places. So either my book is wrong or Leeds is wrong. For statistical reasons, and because I don't want to go back to the root of that book after spending many years on it, I'm just going to have to chalk it up to Leeds being a statistical deviation. a freakish deviation. The reason, as I said, is pretty obvious. If you're young and you're Jewish and you're idealistic, you don't want to come out in public and say during the Israeli assault on Lebanon in 2006, some of you might remember, in the last 72 hours, when the UN resolution had already been passed to impose a ceasefire, after the resolution had been passed, in the last 72 hours, Israel dropped approximately 4 million cluster bombs on South Lebanon. If you're young and Jewish, you don't want to defend that. If you're young, you're Jewish, you're idealistic, you're liberal, during Israel's attack on Gaza in 2008-9, it dropped white phosphorus, which reaches a temperature of 1,500 degrees Celsius, 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 810 degrees Celsius, I think. They dropped the white phosphorus on 2 hospitals in Gaza. If you're young and you're Jewish and you're liberal, you don't want to have to defend that. If there's somebody like in the United States, some of you may know this character, this rotund character named Rush Limbaugh, or Sarah Palin. The son of Rush Limbaugh or the daughter of Sarah Palin, yeah, you'll defend that. You would defend breaking the kneecaps with nuns. That's their thing. But it's not a Jewish thing. Jews, for better or for worse, I think for the better, they don't defend those sorts of things in public. And so it's become an impossible thing to reconcile supporting Israel with your Jewish liberal convictions. And the last development, which I would bring attention to, is the relative decline in U.S. power. Is, relatively speaking, we're still a long way before the U.S. is a complete nullity like the U.K. But it's a relative. Are you offended by that? The Pakistanis took it. And you could see that relative decline in U.S. power during the whole Palestinian bid for statehood. As everybody in this room knows, the U.S. vetoes Security Council resolutions 2 or 3 times a year during the Israel-Palestine conflict. People just stopped counting. It was not even an interesting subject to tabulate. But this time, when that issue was coming before the Security Council, the U.S., for the first time in my recollection, when it was on the verge of being brought before the Security Council, the U.S. panicked. And it was applying every kind of pressure to try to get the Palestinians not to bring that resolution before the Security Council. And the obvious question is, why did the U.S. panic? And I think the answer is because not only is the U.S. isolated, but for the first time the U.S. actually fears its isolation. That this isolation is created for itself by aligning with Israel on this question is now costing them some significant, they're paying a price. How significant we can debate, but certainly they're paying a price. Surprisingly, the Palestinians, for the first time, probably since the well, you could say since Camp David in 2000, but for the first time in a long time, the Palestinians defied the United States. Despite all the pressures and the threats and the browbeating, the Palestinians proceeded to put their bid for statehood before the United Nations. And they actually discovered, to their complete amazement, there's life after defying the United States. When it came to the recent UNESCO vote, now remember, this was not a kind of pro forma vote where the U.S. is always isolated. The U.S. had a lot invested in these votes. Invested means they were applying the pressure. And it was surprising to me even to watch the UNESCO vote. How many people watched it on YouTube? Raise your hand. It was actually an interesting thing. I don't usually watch those things, but it was actually quite interesting to watch. The Director General of UNESCO, she was very dignified. And she read a really, I thought, a pretty impressive statement with great dignity. She was sitting next to the President of UNESCO, who I understood to be the Hungarian representative. And if you watched her, it would actually be fun maybe later to put it up. She's veritably choking. She's having trouble breathing, she's taking water, she's fidgeting, because she realizes it's her paycheck that's at stake. And when you saw her outfit and her hairdo, you realize that there was a hefty paycheck. And then when it came to the vote, I was rather surprised. France, despite the American pressure, it voted yes. And then when it came to the UK, it wasn't a disaster. The UK abstained. I was very surprised. They're all defying now the Americans. As you know, the Americans wanted it to be no. But the best they can get from the UK, the best they can get, was an abstention. So there is clearly, the US doesn't quite get its way in the manner that it used to. And if you looked at the negative votes, it was 13 negative votes, and it was Vanuatu, Samoa, Marshall Islands, combined populations can fit up front there. They're having a problem. And so now, the next obvious question is, it looks like an opportunity has opened up. The constellation of political forces in the world has changed, and you could say, relatively speaking, it's changed in favor of the Palestinians, or in favor of opposing the U.S.-Israeli rejectionism and obstructionism. That still leaves the key question. And the key question is, okay, an opportunity is now there, may be there. And the question obviously is, an opportunity for what? What should we aim for? What should be our goal? What should we be, if we can use the expression, hammering away in public opinion to give our moral and our personal energies to make them the most effective, the most efficacious? What should be our goal? And here I think there's always been a big problem with the way people articulate what the goal should be. Because typically when you get into these discussions of the goal, or as the language is, what do you support, people always put it in a kind of personalized way, as in what do you support, one state or two states, making it as if politics was like a Chinese menu. You choose one from column A, two from column B. That's what politics was about. What do you support? What do you like? What do you choose? I think that's what politics is about. And I think a clear-headedness about what politics is about will take us a long way towards trying to formulate a goal that has a real chance of achieving fruition, being realized. And here I think the most useful person to look at is the Mahatma, Mr. Gandhi. Gandhi was a very shrewd politician, drove the British mad, with his apparent simplicity. Cagey political operator. Mr. Gandhi, he may have appeared so, but he was nobody's fool. He was also extremely well-read, even though he pretended not to be. I had occasion a couple of years ago to start wading through his collected works, which you would perhaps be surprised to learn. They're going to 110 volumes, 500 pages per volume. Now, it is true it's mostly not about politics. Politics is only one of Gandhi's interests. I won't call it obsession. Gandhi wrote a lot about religion, was extremely knowledgeable on the, I won't call them the great religions because I don't want to rank them, but he was knowledgeable on the major religions in the world, very knowledgeable. He was also, as some of you know, he was a health food nut. Actually, the only book he ever wrote that sold was while he was in the UK. He wrote a book on health food, and it was a bestseller here. Yeah, that was it. And he also was kind of obsessed with natural cures. He had a natural cure for everything. So if any of you in the room suffer from constipation, Gandhi's there. Any of you, I don't want to embarrass any of you like I embarrassed our Pakistani friends. Any of you who suffer from impotence, he had a cure. I recommended it recently to some friends of mine. He had a cure for everything. My books don't sell very well. I'm not pleased by the fact that it's mostly because my main people who are mostly interested in me are young people, and young people don't read anymore. It used to be like 10 years ago, people used to come up to me and say, Professor Finkelstein, I read all your books. And nowadays they come up and with an equal amount of pride, surging with pride, they say, Professor Finkelstein, I watched all your YouTube Which I will admit is an accomplishment because I understand there are now over 3,000 of them. I'm not sure we should feel proud or slightly insane. But in any case, I was thinking that maybe one day, because I've read about half of Gandhi's collected works, I would write a book called Going Gandhi, the Mahatma's Guide to Good Diet, Good Living, and Good Health. How many of you would purchase that? This is usually what it is, like 3 people. Well, if you're not going to buy that title, it's hopeless. In any event, Gandhi did have a lot to say about, obviously, the subject of politics and nonviolence. And obviously, he has something to say to this conflict, because in essence, the conflicts are not fundamentally different. He was trying to end the occupation of the most formidable empire the world had known up to then, hither to then, namely the British Empire. And the Palestinians are also trying to end the foreign occupation. And their main obstacle behind the regional power is the most formidable empire post the British Empire, namely the Americans. So, it seems to me sensible to look at what he had to say. And I want to just go through some of his insights, not in a pedantic classroom way, but because I think they clarify from a politically shrewd person who devoted his entire life to steeping himself in the Indian people. Nobody understood the Indian people better than Gandhi because he lived their life. That's a fact. It's very impressive to read not just how he lived, but the the magnitude of the detail. If you look in his collected works, you see which books he read. And he's always ordering books on soil conservation, crop production, water, all these very technical manuals. He wanted to know everything about how the Indian masses, what he used to call the 450 million dumb masses. But not dumb in the sense of stupid, but dumb in the sense they can't speak. Nobody's articulating their feelings, their sentiments. He knew the people, and that's why I think it's useful if you want to build a movement to see how it's done. I think it kind of gives you a guide. And the first thing Gandhi says, which I found very illuminating, he says, politics, it's not about trying to change public opinion. It's not about trying to change public opinion. He says politics is about getting people to act on what they already know is wrong. It's a very different conception of politics. In my generation, there are many people, myself included, who thought we had a monopoly on truth. We knew the truth, and we had to come and explain to the benighted, ignorant masses what is the truth, because we possessed it. We called it a science. But Gandhi says that's not what politics is about. Politics is not about bringing the truth to people. Politics is about getting people to act on what they already know is wrong. Well, what does that mean? I'm sure everybody in this room has had the same experience as myself. Each day you get up, and in the course of the day, you look around you, and you see 10,000 things, which you say, that's just not right. That's wrong. That's not right. That shouldn't be. We know it's wrong. It's transparently wrong, but we don't do anything about it. I know my own experience. Every day I go jogging down the main boulevard where I live, and come the winter, as in coming now, there's an overpass, and underneath the overpass there are always these Mexican workers who have no place to live, and so they sleep under the overpass at night. And when it gets to shivering temperatures in the winter, I should say the frigid temperatures in the winter, I always think to myself, you have at least now 10 winter coats in your closet, because I don't throw anything, practically nothing away from these clothes. And I don't need those winter coats. Some of them go back when I was 16 years old. I don't need them. I don't use them. And I always resolve, every time I jog by, I'm going to go home and I'm going to take out those winter coats and give it to those guys. And you know what? I've been saying it for about 7 years. I never do it. I know it's wrong. It's particularly wrong when I have all those coats in my apartment. I don't do anything about it. And Gandhi's point is, the whole point of his nonviolence, what he called satyagraha, the whole point was to get people to act on what they know is wrong. So I know myself, if suddenly a half dozen people adopted the cause of giving winter coats to the homeless and made a big to-do even stop traffic in the street, I'd be the first one to bring down the coat. I know that. And that's what Gandhi tried to do. He didn't try to change public opinion. The purpose of his nonviolence was to get people to act on what they already knew was wrong, to do something about it. Or as he liked to say, the purpose of nonviolence was, and now I'm quoting him, to quicken the dead conscience of public opinion into life. You get that conscience to act on what it already knows is wrong. But now, there's a restriction, you can call it, a qualification. And the qualification is this, that nonviolence will never work unless there's an agreement on the goal. It's not enough that you act in a moral way. That's not enough. People have to also perceive that your goal is moral, or you will not get people to act. So what does that mean? I'm not sure what the situation is like in the United Kingdom, but in the US, most polls show that Americans are divided down the middle on abortion. 50% of Americans call themselves pro-life, and 50% call themselves pro-choice. What is it like in the UK? About the same? No. Much more pro-life. Pro-choice. Yeah. No, America. That's for the Americans who know what abortion is. It's about 50% pro-choice and 50% pro-life. So, let's, as a hypothetical situation, imagine that the 50% who are pro-life, they say we're going to converge on all the abortion clinics in the United States, and we are going to go on a fast unto the death until they stop performing abortions. Their means of fast unto the death couldn't be more nonviolent, couldn't be more moral. But for the 50% of Americans who call themselves pro-choice, will they be moved by that? Well, what do you think? Will they be moved by it?
Yes, maybe.
I don't think so. The attitude of those who are pro-choice is, I hope they do go on a fast until the death, and I hope they drop dead. Nonviolent means are not going to move them. If you want the nonviolence to work, it has to be directed against the public, which already agrees on your goal. If they don't agree on the goal, there's no possibility of it working. And now, if you choose the wrong goal, then you end up not building a movement, you end up creating a cult. And there's a very big difference between a cult and a movement. And actually, Gandhi, he was both. He lived two lives, Mr. Gandhi. The life that most of you are familiar with is Gandhi as the political leader. But Gandhi was also a cult leader. He had what it was called back then ashrams. They still are called ashrams. And a ashram was sort of like a cult, and Gandhi was a very tough taskmaster. If you belong to his ashram, no meat, because he's a vegetarian, no sex, because he's a brahmachari, you weren't allowed to make idle jokes, you weren't allowed to read in the toilet, you weren't allowed to use a wristwatch, you weren't even allowed to wear underwear. Gandhi was pretty tough. As a matter of fact, he made people in his ashrams keep daily diaries of everything they did, every minute of the day, because Gandhi thought it was sinful to waste time. Nothing more sinful than squandering time. And so you had to account for every minute of your day. But the point is, as a political leader, as a leader of the Indian Congress Party, he obviously didn't make that or those conditions for membership. Because if he made them conditions for membership, it wouldn't be a movement. It would be an ashram. And so our goal, it seems to me, is to be very careful that as we set that goal, we're careful that the goal is not going to reduce the attraction of our movement, but is going to reach that broad public. Well, as I said, the condition is that the broad public already agrees. And so now, the obvious question is, where does the broad public stand on the issue of Israel-Palestine? Because that's the critical question. It's not whether you believe in one state or two states. It's not whether you believe in one state or two states. It's not what I believe. It's not a personal question. It's a political question. It's about where people stand. And here it seems to me the answer is very obvious. There is in every single representative body, both politically representative and also respected political body, the same answer keeps coming up. Whether one likes it or not, the answer is the broad public, all the way to the extreme end of the mainstream spectrum, what we might call the enlightened public opinion. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, International Court of Justice, they all say the same thing. There has to be a full Israeli withdrawal from the territories it occupied in June 1967, the rights of the Palestinians to a statehood in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and there has to be what's called, or the terminology that's used, a just resolution of the refugee question. That's not my terminology, and it's not my axe to grind. That's where public opinion is at. And if you ignore that public opinion, you are at risk of reducing the possible reach of the movement, and you are at risk of missing a huge international, a huge historic opportunity to resolve the conflict. In fact, if you look at the representative institutions in the world, Israel-Palestine is probably the least controversial conflict in the world today. That's the truth. It's hard to believe. So let's take some examples. Let's start with the most representative political body in the world, which is the most representative political body in the world is the United Nations General Assembly. And every year, the United Nations General Assembly, incidentally this month, every year in November, they vote on a resolution called Peaceful Settlement of the Palestine Question. And it says two states, June 67 border, mutual recognition, just resolution of the refugee question. So just briefly, let me give you some sense of what the vote looks like. And then you decide for yourselves whether or not this is controversial or not. I'll go back roughly 10 to 15 years and sample the record. 1997, the vote 155 to 2. The two negative votes, Israel and the United States. 1998, the vote 154 to 2. The two negative votes, Israel and the United States. 2004, the vote 161 to 7. Some of you are saying, aha, we're now all the way up to 7. That's true. Israel, the United States, Australia, Grenada, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau. 2008, the vote 164 to 7. The negative votes, Israel, the United States, Australia, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau. And this past year, 2010, the vote 165 to 7. The 7 negative votes, Israel, the United States, Australia, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, and Palau. That's it. Some of you have that nervous look in your face and you want to laugh at Nauru and Palau because you don't know what they are. You don't know what they are. With all due respect to small countries, as I said, the combined population is probably behind the seat over here. And in the case of some of them, because of global warming, It won't be around much longer. Well, some of you who are skeptical say, okay, that's the global picture. That's all the countries. But what about those Arab states? What about them? And in fact, those Arab states, they have their own regional organization, the Arab League. It's composed of 22 countries. And the Arab League in March 2002 put forth a settlement of the conflict. And it was the same thing. 2 states along the June 67 border and a just resolution of the refugee question. What was the vote in the Arab League? Well, the vote was 22-0. It's not very close. That's not very controversial. Well, then some of you are thinking, well, those are the Arab states, but what about those Muslims, those Islamic fanatics, like Pakistan? Well, the Islamic states, they have their own organization. It's called the Conference of the Islamic Countries, the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference. The OIC, they have their own organization, and the OIC is composed of 57 countries, including, for example, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the OIC voted in 2002, and now I'm quoting them, to adopt the Arab Peace Initiative to resolve the issue of Palestine and the Middle East, and decide to use all possible means in order to explain and clarify the full implications of this initiative and with international support for its implementation. What was the vote in the OIC? The vote was 57-0. Supporting exactly what the UN General Assembly, exactly what the Arab League said. No dissent whatsoever in either the Arab League, which renewed its peace initiative as recently as 2009 in Doha, and the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Bear in mind, incidentally, when I referred to the UN vote in each of those years, Iran voted with the majority. Beginning, I think, in 2004, and I said 161 to 7, 164 to 7, that all included Iran. If you look at the actual voting record, Iran is with the rest of the world, apart from the United States and Israel and some South Sea atolls. Mr. Obama, the lamentable president of the United States, he gave a speech recently in the United Nations, and he lectured these Arab and Muslim states. And he said that they have to, and I'm quoting, they have to establish normal relations with Israel. That was his demand to the Arab Muslim world. Mr. Obama is slightly behind the times, or behind the curve. Because if you look at the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, they explicitly say, if Israel recognizes a Palestinian state in the June 67 border, they said we're ready and willing to establish normal relations with Israel. So the demand he put in the Arab Muslim world is already somewhat obsolete by about 10 years. But then there are some of you in the room, perhaps, who are thinking, well, you know, these representative organizations, tyranny of the majority, that's the expression I like to use in the 1970s, before the United States was being tyrannized by the rest of humanity. So they said like democracy is a little bit problematic as an idea because you can have tyranny of the majority. Okay, well and good. So instead of looking at the most representative organization in the world, let's look at the most respected international legal institution. Who would like to venture the most respected international legal institution?
International Courts of Justice.
Yeah, the International Court of Justice, the institution to which nevertheless an issue, a contentious issue, legal contentious issue. That's to where it's referred. And as it happened in 2004, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, it rendered a landmark opinion on the wall that Israel's been building in the occupied territories. And in the course of its opinion, for reasons which I don't have time to go into now, they had to tackle many of the issues during an Israel-Palestine conflict. Without going into the details now, they said, just to give you a summary opinion, they said, well, it's clear that Israel has no title to the West Bank, no title to Gaza, no title to East Jerusalem, and the International Court of Justice said, the West Bank, Gaza, and the whole of East Jerusalem, it said these are occupied Palestinian territories. That was the words which now become the standard nomenclature, OPT, the occupied Palestinian territories. Number two, they said, well, it's a no-brainer that the Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal under international law. Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its population into occupied territory. So they ruled that all the settlements are illegal under international law. Well, on these particular questions, borders, Jerusalem, settlements, what was the vote in the International Court of Justice? It's interesting, I'm not trying to be polemical, but it is interesting to look at, because the International Court is a very contentious court. They can't really, you can't get them to agree on pretty much anything, even on some issues which should be pretty much no-brainers. So, for example, in 1996, the issue came before the International Court of Justice whether the use of nuclear weapons is legal under international law. And the issue was because under international law, it's illegal to use an indiscriminate weapon, a weapon which can cause mass death and destruction to an innocent civilian population. It would seem pretty obvious that nuclear weapons should be illegal under the law. What would be a more indiscriminate weapon? But the International Court of Justice, you couldn't get them to agree to it. At the end, the vote went 8-7. It was very close. One of the dissenting judges, who I like very much from Sri Lanka, Judge Veeramantri. Anyone here from Sri Lanka? Well, Judge Veeramantri, he said this court's a little bit crazy. I'm using my language. But he said this doesn't really make sense. He said in 1899, we banned, the world community banned dum-dum bullets because if a dum-dum bullet penetrates you, it expands and it's very painful. So dum-dum bullets were banned. He says, how can you ban dum-dum bullets? Because one bullet might cause a person pain, but you can't ban a nuclear weapon which will exterminate hundreds of thousands of people in the blink of an eye. That doesn't make much sense. But as I said, it was contentious. Why do I mention it? Because when it came to the issues I just mentioned, borders, Jerusalem, settlements, we're told all the time these are very controversial issues, very contentious issues. I was just reading Condoleezza Rice's memoir, The Witch from Hell. She refers to the settlements as a very controversial issue. But the International Court of Justice, that contentious body, on the issues which I just referred to, you know what the vote was? It was 15-0. These are not controversial issues at all. Every time the BBC or the government refers to them as controversial, it's just a flat-out lie in the real world. There was one judge, the American judge, Thomas Bergenheim, who on the bigger issue of the legality of the wall that Israel was building, he voted negative. He did not agree it was illegal. But on the crucial question of the legality of the settlements, Bergenheim joined the majority. he was very clear, and I'm just going to quote him to you. He said, paragraph 6 of the Fourth Geneva Convention does not admit for any exception on grounds of military or security exigencies. It provides that the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. And Val says, I agree that this provision applies to the Israeli settlements in the West Bank and that their existence violates Article 49 of the Geneva Convention. Every judge, all 15. So if you take the most representative bodies in the world, the United Nations General Assembly, you take the regional bodies, the Arab League, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, you take the most esteemed body in the world, namely the International Court of Justice, they all reach the same conclusion. For us, for our purposes,